And hello, everyone. This is WD Carousel Podcast. My name's Ian.
And I'm Crystal.
And we're going to talk about another ride, or a defunct,
Yes,
or
it is a shut down, abandoned, old, classic ride.
that was then opened up again and then closed again.
And then now is a character meet and greet.
But
no connection whatsoever.
But first, we need to talk to you about our friend Jenny, who started Sea Witch Adventures.
A trip to Disney should be exciting from the moment you decide to go. Unfortunately, the details of travel, ticket purchases, and FastPass scheduling and meal planning can suck the magic right out of your trip. And that's where Jenny comes in.
Sea Witch Adventures is a personalized trips planning service that puts the magic back in your trip by taking the stress out. You'll get tailored concierge, tailored to your experience that you want, and on the budget that you set. The best part, there's no additional cost because the agents are compensated by Disney and other travel vendors.
Yeah, follow Sea Witch Adventures on Instagram at seawitch.adventures to find out more. Honestly, we've met her. She's amazing. And we've met her via Skype and, or whatever.
And we ended up talking to her way longer than we expected to.
Yes, she's an amazing woman, a lot like our personalities. So if you like us, because you listen to us, you would probably really appreciate her sense of humor and personability, and she's a great resource as far as Disney trips go. So if you don't want to listen to our 40-minute podcasts over and over, she's an excellent source regarding that. So check her out.
Yeah, absolutely. So and after all that, in case some of you are wondering what we're going to talk about today, because you're not paying attention to the title of the podcast.
Oh, by the way, she's our sponsor.
And she's our sponsor, yeah.
We should probably throw that in there.
Yeah. We are going to be talking about ExtraTERRORestrial
Alien Encounter.
Which it was all before my time. I was
going to say, you were born.
I was born, and I was even walking around able to go to Disney, but in a very unique situation at a Disney park, I was not really eligible to go in.
No, this is one that actually had like an age restriction and a height restriction that had nothing to do with a roller coaster or fast movement or any sort of bouncing that could have made a small body be injured.
Right.
This is something where it was so intense that they put that limit on there.
Psychologically intense.
Yeah, this was Disney's first and only real attempt at a horror sort of ride.
Yeah, like a psychological thriller ride experience or attraction experience, and it's everything about it is just different. Like nothing about it matches
with anything that's in that has been or is currently within a Disney park.
Exactly. And so starting from the beginning, the original ride in that space, because we're talking about Tomorrowland. So
Tomorrowland in Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom.
Yes, and it is, as those of you that have been to Tomorrowland know, it's sort of kind of walled in. Like it's sort of, it's very kind of locked in space-wise. Like, with Fantasyland and some of the other places, it's a little easier for them to kind of carve new areas out and do stuff. Basically, it seems like everything in Tomorrowland, minus some very recent stuff, is basically just built into the same stuff the other stuff was built into.
Very much
almost
so.
Everything. Like Space Ranger Spin was built on Dream Flight and all that kind of stuff. So in this case, Mission to Mars had just closed, and instead of doing something else kind of more on the fantasy, real world Mars kind of futuristic thing, they went kind of more of sci-fi. So it was something that they had decided initially. This was in the early 90s. They thought that at first what they were going to do was do something, and this is all Eisner, of course.
Yes, this is totally Michael Eisner trying to compete with the new Universal Studios Orlando park.
Yes. And
the bigger attention there, as well as trying to get an older teenage crowd to come into the parks. That way it wasn't just, it's a small world and
right.
all of those little kiddie rides that we're so used to seeing. They wanted to give something that was adventurous.
And more
intense,
thrilling. And so the original concept was for it to be a Alien themed ride, like Alien the movie franchise.
Yes,
so
with the xenomorphs.
Right, and so Disney actually, and still to this day, has the license to do rides with the Alien franchise.
Which is how it ended up in the Great Movie Ride.
Yes.
And we were able to see the actual Xenomorph coming out in the Great Movie Ride. May it rest in peace.
May it rest in peace, yep.
You're not going to see it anymore, but still, it was...
Yeah, it was a...
purchase.
It was a purchase that they originally had intended it to be part of the Alien Encounter thrill ride thing.
Extraterrorrestrial.
And so... Believe it or not, that somehow the Disney executives decided that would actually be too terrifying. Like, there's too much psychological horror going on in that franchise. They were just like, this is going to go badly for us, and they ditched it. So instead, the Imagineers went to George Lucas, like you do when you're trying to do sci-fi, you're not trying to terrify everybody. And so they brought in George Lucas.
And they already had a working relationship with George Lucas as well, so it made it easy for them to collaborate on a new project.
Right. They already had everything in place with him, and so they jumped in and they decided to create a new hyper-immersive thrill ride. And so, or attraction. I guess I shouldn't say it's a thrill ride per se.
But it was still kind of classified. No, it wasn't.
It wasn't moving.
It wasn't moving.
But it had, like,
so
you were restrained.
Let me explain the ride a little bit to you, okay? There are 3 parts to the original ride, and this is one where I actually remember being on it as a little girl, and I should not have been there. My mother had no idea.
Well, yeah.
But the first one is an intro room where they talk a little bit about what's going on, what the options are. It's supposed to be interspace community that you're creating and becoming a part of. And they're like, well, we're going to take this technologically lower planet and give you guys new tech to be able to bring you up to the level that everybody else is at. The next room that you go into is one where they talk about a teleporter. Okay, so they have a little guy, I think his name was Skippy.
Skippy, yeah.
That they had teleport from one tube to another tube while you were still all just standing in this big open room. And then they let you into the main show area where you sit down in a chair and then this huge, like, strap in, you feel like you're going to be on a very high-end roller coaster. Like, it completely covers you all down your shoulders, across your front, holds you in for the next part of the show to happen. And I remember being younger and looking at my mother going, is this going to spin or move? Just because the restraints are so familiar and so close to what was on moving rides. But my mother assured me, no, this isn't going to move. And I was like, okay, and we'll get to the rest later. Yeah. But I just wanted to put that out there. So the only part that you actually have a restraint against you is that last final act.
Right. So, and some of this stuff was repurposed from the show components of Mission to Mars. So, like, the main showroom, the third big showroom, that's based on it. However, the restraints were added due to reasons we'll talk about
in a little bit.
So, they after they just settled on all this, it kind of is half. It's all, with lots of very famous actors.
Yes, high-end stars. That were part of the contribution to creating this.
Right, because and they were almost all of them are either animatronic robots or they are like super made up.
You can't
aliens.
Recognize them at all.
Basically, not at all. So the robot, which is my favorite of all of them, is Tim Curry, which is just so Tim Curry. Like, the name of the robot is Sir. Like, I mean, come on. Like,
and he is one of Disney's traditional animatronic characters. So you see him, quote unquote, live, moving around, and I think they actually repurposed that animatronic in another ride. I'm sure. Don't quote me, but I do feel like he's found some place.
It was a good animatronic.
It was a very good animatronic.
So it's very, like,
articulate and
very well put together, very articulate, and the voice acting from Tim Curry, of course, is just phenomenal as it would be, because it's Tim Curry.
What else would you expect?
And they did a little bit of digitization, but just enough to make him feel digital, but give him, like, lots of personality. He's like if C-3PO is what we all wished C-3PO was. It's kind of the vibe that I would. If C-3PO
Don't make the Star Wars people mad.
Can't I just want to have fun. Aw, man. Okay. So we had Tim Curry, there was Jeffrey Jones, there was, what's her name? Kathy, I can never pronounce her last name.
Najimy?
She's in Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
You know who she is. We're just bad at names.
I can't pronounce things.
So, anyway,
They put the ride together.
they put this ride together, and it's in there. It's ready to go by 1994, like later 1994. And then they did some previews, and they ran it through, and Michael Eisner, like, almost immediate was like, this isn't crazy enough, and so...
This is not scary enough. We need to change all of this.
So there's no real documentation of exactly what happened in the very, very early original one, except that I do know that there was a different actor that played Sir, the Tim Curry character.
Oh!
And it was very humorous. So it was like,
Okay.
I mean, so is the Tim Curry, but in a very different way. It was much more slapsticky and goofy, and then when they redid it with Tim Curry, they made him like kind of evil. Like everything in this is like,
But see, Tim Curry can pull off evil
really
and
well,
slapsticky
at once, and he did. So that was like the big thing. Like the first thing that is the big change that they did was suddenly like this like goofy like animatronic character became kind of sinister, and like that's kind of like the undercurrent for the entire ride. You really notice it. First, the Jeffrey Jones speech at the beginning, where he's the CEO of the company, is a little creepy, and then suddenly, for all sorts of reasons, and then you move into the Tim Curry stuff, and he's also like even more sinister, and the things that happen to that poor little alien
Skippy, poor Skippy. He's
just
adorable too, by the way.
Yeah, and
he's meant to be like
adorable.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, like, you immediately pick up on some real weird, funny business. And it's supposed to feel like you're at, like, a tech conference.
Yes. This is supposed to be, like... And they even, in the first showroom, before they actually start the actual, like, video you're supposed to be watching, they have almost, like, what other convention...
stuff.
Yeah, you can go to
it's like
events.
The slideshow events of all the stuff going on. It's actually pretty funny.
At this time, you're going to have this conference, or at this time, you're going to go to this speaker, or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So it's very immersive. It was very well done at the time. And so Michael Eisner basically was like, not scary enough, and just closes it back down again. And they have to wait up until...
I think it was like a couple $1 million renovation too, to make it even scarier.
So they didn't open it until June 20th of 1995 after they did all those.
And it was around there that I went and tried it.
Yes.
And was not ready for it.
So I guess at this point we can kind of go into the ride experience in the main big theater space.
So we've already talked about the first couple sections, which, are intro shows, trying to get you in the mindset. And then you get into the main theater area, and it is theater in the round. So there are people in a circle in a couple different rows around this main center point. This main center point is supposed to be a teleport where someone from I think he's like, not the CEO, but something very similar to that, a high-end guy, is like, I'll be the first experiment to go meet all these people.
CEO.
Yeah, to meet all these people. And so then during that whole situation, when they're sending him over, I'm using air quotations for those listening, they happen to get them mixed up with another entity and download him. I'm going to call it downloading, because what else is it?
That's fine, yeah. Transporting, teleporting.
And all of a sudden, there's this monster that has bright red eyes and big leathery wings and is just a huge monster. It's the one that they chose instead of the xenomorph.
Yeah.
Because, the xenomorph was too scary.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that.
This really dark room, and lights are flashing, and then all of a sudden the glass breaks, and the monster gets out, and then the lights go dark. You don't see anything. And at that point in time, in that restraint that has, like, been resting on your shoulders for a while, it kind of comes to life, but you don't really notice it. And this is where the technology really takes over. And this is a ride that's not based on visuals. It's based on all the other senses.
Senses, yeah.
And the only other part that you see is there's actually a cast member that comes out above your head that's supposed to be on the overheads with a flashlight, like trying to find the monster that escaped. And during that time, you have the surround sound in front of you with screams and other eerie noises and everything that makes you think that the monster is stalking the people around you, and they're screaming and attacking. There's bass sounds going on in front of you in that restraint, but you don't really notice it, to give you the shaking feeling of the monster stalking.
Yeah.
There's a point where I remember feeling almost like a ball roll across the back of my neck as he supposedly passed behind me. And then there was, smoke that was coming up in my faces and mist because his breath was so hot next to you, and it was very, very intense, and it was very scary for someone who has never really experienced horror before.
Yeah.
Up until that point. I think I was, I would be 10 at that point.
Yep. Yeah, around 95, 96.
And it was definitely something that has stuck with me to this day. At one point in time, they are able to get the monster back into the tube, and then they send him back off again and teleport him back out of there, and then the lights come back on and you're able to leave, essentially. But it is so immersive in that restraint situation that they put on you that it tricks all your other senses into believing that it's real.
Yeah. Yeah, and so from a technical side, because I'm here, we're doing a little technical stuff, it's really interesting to me, and I never went on this ride again because I was, that much younger, so it would have been even more terrifying. I don't think I would have met height requirements, and even if I did, it wouldn't have been a good idea. And they had I think they had like a 12-year-old was the cutoff time. And
I was 10.
You were 10, yeah. And even 12 might have been. It really depends on the person. Like, it's a certain kind of intensity that would be very. It's intentionally sensory overloading, and they do it in a number of ways, as you were describing. You've got most of it's auditory. They had very highly directed and tuned drivers to your ears, and they were only in your ears, like, so no one else had the, it was very individualized per person. And then they had, some people call them a butt kicker or a driver, sometimes I call them a resident driver or like a butt kicker, and that lives in your seat. And so it's a kind of driver that's actually a stress member of the thing. And so instead of being like a subwoofer, you are the subwoofer, and it vibrates you, so you get these like really impactful, like haptic kind of. That
was probably the big steps that they were doing.
Yeah, there was that, and then they did have a series of, like, I think it was 5 or 6 1500 watt subdrivers that were off over in the thing, and they'd actually repurposed those from Mission to Mars for the launch sequence, so they could go boom, they could make these huge noises that filled the whole room and were very intense.
Jarring.
Yeah, so it's this like super, they basically had like a THX surround system like strapped to everyone's head is basically what it boils down to, which is crazy. And then on top of that, they have all the 4D effects that you get from like all the 4D shows like PhilharMagic and It's Tough to Be a Bug and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then they use those with laser focus on top of these highly sensory things where you start to pick up on stuff because you're not seeing it.
And there were also lasers.
And then
you said laser things, but it's also lasers.
It's also lasers. Yeah, so it was the one that you were talking about, they had it was like a little piece of like really, really lightweight rubber, and they had a little tiny air cannon behind it, and it would blast it onto the back of your neck. And so the goal was for it to go and back across your neck. And I think they were going after it licking you as it goes by.
Yeah, and I could have sworn it felt like someone had like stroked across my back, which makes me nowadays think of those massagers that have like the rolly balls on them that you lean back against, and it's one of those rolly balls.
Yeah,
that's what my brain interpreted it as when I was little.
And Tough to Be a Bug has something similar to that too, where it would poke you in the back a little bit. I mean, it's obviously it's like this much, it's like nothing, but when you're already tuned in a specific way to be it's all very, very, these little tiny stimuli can be very, very intense. And I know they had water, you said water and mist, and and then hot, moist air, like that was kind of that was what they did. Like it was very, very intense. And so That's the ride experience.
Are you sad you've missed out on it?
And I mean, at this point in my life, I would, if it was still around, I probably would have done it once. I would not have enjoyed it, but I would have done it once because I would have been
Just to
very
have the
curious.
experience.
Because it sounds, from a technical standpoint, very fascinating. And not to mention, there was a very, like, large, intense animatronic they had running in the middle for that monster. And the big giant tube. So there's these kind of showpieces too. So it was very elaborate, you know, to a certain degree. And then plus all this video stuff that they did with all these like top name actors of the time. So it was a lot. Like you really think about like what it was at the time. Like they really went all in. So classic Eisner.
Yeah. And this ran until what, 2003?
2003, October 12th, 2003. And so
There are speculations as to why we no longer have it.
The most common ones are people, they were not properly prepping people for what it was.
The intensity.
And you know, I've watched videos of it now because I got to a point in my life where I'm just like, I need to watch it because, you know, I never got to do it. And just looking at it, I'm like, I would have hated that as a kid. I would have hated it. I mean, I would have been just like, I would have been mad at my parents for months. Like, if they took me in there, I would have been just totally, I would have hated it. And so I think the biggest and most popular concept there is that, like, you're in a Disney park, you should assume that basically everything in there is safe enough to be
family friendly
to a certain degree. Like, maybe the most scary thing is the Great Movie Ride. May it rest in peace. Just that, you know what I mean? That level. This was so hyper. It's like, what was the line they always said was, Haunted Mansion's no scarier than a whoopee cushion. Mm-hmm. And that's basically like almost all Disney stuff never goes past that. Like, you can, sure, there's things that are surprising or are kind of like, oh, that was,
and the most thrill that you get are things like the Haunted Mansion or Tower of Terror, where there's like a little bit of spoopy to it.
But it's mostly just like a thrill ride.
But it's camp. And
it's camp.
Where a lot of the thrill comes in is primarily the main ride associated with it, hence the drop in Tower of Terror.
Right.
You know, that sort of thing.
Right. And so in this case, or like when you go past the Yeti in Expedition Everest or something of that nature, and instead this was focused entirely on the spoopy. Like, it was just looking at the psychological horror and how they can push your buttons. That's its only job. And it did it very well, you know, because...
Would it be my favorite ride right now if it was still open? Probably. I'm a horror girl.
Yeah.
I blame this for getting my start.
Yep. So there's that, and I kind of get that as to why they leave this open in the middle of the it's like having like hard drugs in a liquor store. You're just not... It's not in line with anything else. And at the time, like, if it was in Epcot, maybe it'd still be there, you know?
Potentially. Or if it was in Hollywood Studios, where, you know, movies come to life, that's the whole premise of Hollywood Studios, it would be more fitting to exist there. But since it was in the Magic Kingdom, where, you know, dreams come true, this is not like the kind of dream that they were wanting to focus on.
Right. So that's the big theory.
Now there's also a side little theory as well, which I don't know where you found this.
Yeah, so I cannot remember if anyone knows the name of the YouTuber.
This is not the official
story.
No.
Even this isn't
it's just speculation.
This is not the unofficial story. Like, this is not like the widely speculated thing on the internet, as far as I know. And I cannot remember which YouTuber I saw this from.
I don't know.
6 months ago. If I think of it, I'll write it somewhere.
Yes.
Might have been Bright Sun Films. Doesn't matter. If you don't know, the guy that played the CEO was a man by the name of Jeffrey Jones, and in the very late 90s, early 2000s, he was convicted as a pedophile. And I don't remember what all happened there and how it went down, but it was not good. And the ramifications in, like, a Disney theme park are even worse.
As we know, Disney likes to separate themselves from potential issues.
Even potential issues. And this was a confirmed issue that was not good. And so there is a theory, and it may not even be a thing at all, but it may be contributed to it. The fact that they're just like, he was like, he played the CEO. They're like, you know, this is a good time. Let's just shut it down. this is something that I read on that I listened to on a YouTube video from somebody that did these kinds of things, and I don't know.
Take it with a huge block of salt.
Like a big salt lick. Like a big one. Like Himalayan rock salt lamp.
Thank you for understanding where I was going with this. Okay.
Like a big old salt lamp,
But essentially what ended up happening in 2003 was that the ride closed down and was replaced by Stitch's Great Escape, which is a very similar version of the ride, except for none of the intensity whatsoever.
Not even the psychological horror aspect was cut out.
Nothing.
However, I will say that there are still. I was reading the unofficial guide where they interview parents, and back when Stitch's Great Escape was a thing, they interviewed parents, and they still were like, "Yeah, this is fine for teenagers." But, like, even some young kids still, like, I suspect as a young kid I would have been okay, but I wouldn't have liked it. So
dark, animal escaping,
has certain elements to it.
Creepy, even though they were promoting the new movie, and it was a character you were familiar with.
Right.
And I think they, like, dulled down the effects to being more, like...
It was cartoony.
Farts and, like, laughing around you, so it wasn't screams and it wasn't anything like that.
But it was still, you were still, the big complaint was, then the lights were on a little bit too. They didn't go totally dark. And then the other thing that they complained about was, even though it was less spoopy and more like, we got you, blah, blah, like less scary that way, you're still in a restraint. The system was entirely the same. The way that you experienced the ride was entirely the same, and parents with kids that were upset, like with the experience, like a bug's Tough to Be a Bug. I wouldn't call it scary, but there were moments where it's loud or the spiders drop to the ceiling or whatever crap is going on. And if you're a little kid and you want to snuggle up to a parent because you're nervous, it's a bench seat.
You're unable to do so.
You can't do it because when a parent can't comfort their kid because they're strapped into a thing a foot away from them, it causes problems.
And I do mean strapped in. So where these were is this was a hydraulic that came down over your shoulders and settled. It's not something you could pull down. It's not something you had control over. It literally was a
right,
and then landed on your shoulders, securing you in. So definitely a little kid, feeling locked in, would have.
There was just a lot of psychological elements to it, and the fact, so it was that. Seems to be the consensus that was one of the biggest problems was just the restraint. The restraint-based system existed for a reason, but it also caused a lot of problems for a Disney thrill-based attraction when you're not, like, you're strapped in just so you don't move is kind of hard.
And then it was in 2016 that they shut it down to intermittent openings, so it was only open when crowd levels increased and they had to disperse the crowds more into rides. Disney has tendency to do that to closed attractions just to try and disperse the crowds a little bit more. And then I think it was last year, 2017, where they officially got rid of the ride and made it a character meet and greet for Stitch alone. So you go into one of the front rooms and have your character meet and greet with Stitch, but you no longer are actually in the attraction anymore. The attraction has officially been retired.
Okay. And does anyone know for sure if they've shut down the theater space or cut it out? Or
I know that it is, and this is just through experience, trick-or-treat trail. So I know that there is a workaround that they have, so you can go through it and get your candy and then leave real quick without going through all the different levels of the theater. So it's not, the intro, the teleport room, and then the main theater. They've
cut you around
made
it.
a bypass to be able to go through it. So that's where I would think that the Stitch's meet and greet would be in that room that's the bypass.
Right. It's interesting because it's just something that I know about Disney attractions, and this is something we might get to, but Wonders of Life Pavilion in Epcot that is, may rest in peace.
Everything's may rest in peace.
Especially in Epcot. And one of the things that they did was they had Cranium Command, if anyone remembers Cranium Command.
We'll get to it in another episode.
But that ride, even though it was closed for years, the ride structure was still there, but like falling apart. So
well, and the ride structure's still there for like Journey
That's
into Imagination
Imagination.
with Figment, where they have the Rainbow Corridor. That still exists, although
Right,
you
just-
can't
you
access
just
it.
bypass it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Disney has outs in almost anything, which also helps when there's a ride that shuts down. But
Yeah.
you know, I'm guessing that they're utilizing that now as the way to do the character meet and greet and then get you back out.
Yeah. So interesting to know. I'm always like the
It
guy that
is-
wants to know.
It is a great show. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it would be something that would be a favorite of mine now, being a horror girl that I am.
Right.
If it was still existing. But now that it's not, you know, you gotta live off of the very shoddy footage that is living on YouTube.
I love 90s Disney
with a
ride
dark,
footage.
with a dark ride.
Yeah. But anyway, so on that note,
that's the closed ride.
closed ride of the month or whatever we're going with now.
I don't know. I love doing these.
These are
I
really one
love
of my
being able
favorites.
to relive a ride and just the creativity that came with
Yeah.
Disney.
Yeah.
It's something that, you know, we are always in anticipation of the new and the next and the new and the next.
Yeah.
And this is something where you forget just how, like,
In depth they go and the amount of
or
creativity.
the way that they twisted the technology at the time, because they didn't have access to the technology that we now have
Right.
to be able to pull off these different things. It's fun to touch base and then remember, and the slight nostalgia to it is great for me. You didn't experience it because
Right.
you were barely
Right.
walking, but still,
You know.
that is Alien Encounters
Encounters
Extraterrorrestrial. And this has been WD Carousel of Podcast. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian. Also, check out our Patreon.
Yes, please check out our
Which you can
Patreon.
find in the footer of our website.
And we hope you have a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Bye, everybody.
Beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.